Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Akiona Law Podcast, wherein we discuss all things that intersect in the areas of family law and divorce. And today with me, I have you've got a lot of hats. I'm going to get them all. I've got family law. I've got Kathleen Royer, who is a family law attorney. She's a co-parenting coach. She's also a parenting coordinator. She is a divorce family law mediator, and she is the president of the Washington State chapter of AFCC, which stands for the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts. Kathleen, welcome to our podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Kathleen, we're just going to dive right into it. And
Okay.
I know you told me that you've been practicing law for about, I believe, close to 31 years.
Coming up, yeah, in May.
Okay. And what got you into family law and divorce? Because that's a long time to be practicing that area of law.
No, it is. So the story I tell is that when I got out of law school, there really weren't a lot of jobs. And although I swore up and down I wasn't going to practice family law, when I hung out my shingle, that was who walked in my door. And it only took a couple of cases for me to realize that there was a real need for good advocacy in that area. And for, for clients who are going through a huge life experience, and for many a very traumatic life experience, they needed advocates who really heard them, understood what their interests and concerns were, and then tried to advocate in a way that would protect their children and also help them think about what's life going to be like after this.
Okay, I see. That's interesting, because family law and divorce was the last area that I wanted to practice too. But once I started, like you said, it's just you see that need for advocacy, and it is really so fulfilling and so rewarding to help people in this time of need.
In King County, I think it was like 1995. So that would have been when I was like 3 years, I was licensed in 1992. And at that time we had the pilot Unified Family Court project. And I was really fascinated by that, and actually served on the UFC Training Oversight Committee for many, many years. And that is an ongoing committee that still produces twice a month educational programs. Well, actually, they kind of do once a month or twice a month, depending on speaker availability. But I was the co-chair of that committee for many, many years. And then it was Susan Carroll. I don't know if you know Susan, but she followed in those footsteps. I'm not sure who the co-chair is now, but it really is an institution of the court that offers some training on multidisciplinary topics. And at the time that I was, early in my practice, I started representing a private social service agency working with, managing their foster care load, their foster care caseload. And so I was really lucky to have social workers as my clients and be able to go to court and advocate for the kids in our program. And, the agency was very well funded and could actually provide a lot of supportive services for kids in their foster care placements. And so that I always felt so lucky to have had that opportunity, because I learned a ton about child development. I learned a ton about, how do you manage mental, folks with mental health concerns, and a whole variety of things. So I feel that was such a blessing in my practice, was to have that exposure and have that opportunity to really understand to look more broadly at how to, what are families' needs, right? From there, what I did, because there were so many kids in foster care who also had individual education plans. I felt like that was really a really important area to try to add to my practice, so that I could be fluent in that. And so I was very, very fortunate to take a case that actually let me argue for a kid in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Oh my goodness.
On a residential placement case. So, I've had this really, I've just kind of my work, I've just followed the work to things that interest me and help
Yeah.
me create a really big tool bag to work with families.
I love that tool bag to work with families and help families. I love that too, because as for me, I'm coming from a litigation background. I
Hmm.
come from being a prosecutor in the state of Hawaii.
Hmm.
And what Kathleen is talking about is that to be a really good family law divorce attorney like Kathleen, you need emotional intelligence. And
Oh,
when you
yeah.
come out of law school, they don't train you about emotional intelligence like you're talking about. And when attorneys come from a litigation based background, it's really something that they have to be cognizant of and then add that to their toolbox. Because if you just come in family law, just straight litigation, and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and be a bull in a china shop, I feel that you can hurt your client's case sometime.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where the most damage is done to families,
Yeah.
frankly.
Yeah.
Is by pretending like it's kind of that notion that if the only tool that you have in your tool bag is a hammer, every problem is going to look like a nail. Right. And
That is so good.
that doesn't work for families, because
Yeah.
families don't need to be adversaries. They need to be able to engage in a process where they can solve the problem of, we have two
So
households,
true.
we have really limited income. How do we allocate the resources so that everybody's needs are met to the best of our ability with those resources we have?
That's
Right.
that's so great right there. That just sums it up. And I'm going to making a little plug in terms of learning how to become a better family law for your clients. It's really taking those classes that the AFCC offers, Association of Family Courts and Conciliation. That's what kind of helped shift the paradigm in my brain
Yes,
to be more
absolutely.
emotionally intelligent. And again, I ran into you at a conference in Las
Correct.
Vegas last year, and it was just love their conferences.
Yes.
It was good to be
Yeah.
back in person.
Yeah. And I think that it's really important for people to be willing to look more broadly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of it in terms of, without the special education, the special education piece, for example, right?
Okay.
Is a place where there can be a lot of conflict.
Mm,
Right. If parents have a kid, there's a lot of shame associated with having a kid identified for services in the school district. But the problem is, what I learned working with these families, and particularly kids who are very, very bright but neurodiverse, right? So a lot of work in the autism community, a lot of work with
okay.
ADHD and other types of, that kind of constellation of issues, right? It's really important for kids to learn how to use the sort of balance their strengths and their deficit areas. If they don't learn how to do that properly, particularly in the academic environment, they learn inappropriate coping skills. And those
Okay.
then can lead lead to a whole parade of horribles that no parent would wish upon his or her child.
Right.
And, in fact, I had this couple, they were having issues about transitions, right?
Okay.
Right. Kid was really struggling with transitions. I remembered I'd mediated their parenting plan. This was post decree mediation dispute resolution. Well, we can't we can't figure out these transitions, and homework's falling
Wait, hold
apart
on a
and blah
second.
blah blah.
So you mediated their parenting plan, and
Mediated their parenting plan,
then
and then
you're
they came to me to mediate post
okay.
decree. Right.
Post decree, which is, let me just,
Correct.
post decree means after your final divorce order, final parenting plan is entered, you have the dispute about your parenting plan. So they came back and they met
Came
with
back and they were
Kathleen to help them resolve it. And let me just, sorry to interrupt you again, but
good.
transitions means the exchange of the child between the parents. Okay.
Right. Going between households.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
And so that's it. So there were struggles, and they were kind of
Okay.
blaming each other.
Yeah.
And as I listened to how they were blaming one another, I said, well, wait a minute. Am I recalling correctly that you both were talking about having a child with ADHD? Oh,
Mm,
yeah.
okay.
And I said, well, so how are you accommodating that diagnosis and the behavioral sequelae from that? How are you helping this child adapt to those transitions in light of what you actually know about him?
Yeah.
A hallmark of ADHD is not being able to be organized. right? So
right.
transitioning from one household to the other is a
Stressful.
complete nightmare
Right.
for this kid.
Yeah.
And they both just sort of, you could see the light go on,
Wow.
right? And they're like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, we didn't even think about that. And it's like, okay, so let's develop some, goals and objectives for how we're going to do those
Yeah.
exchanges, right? But it's that kind of,
Well, that's exciting.
that,
Yeah.
it's really important to help families tap into using the information they have to make the adjustments they need to make so life works for everybody after, in the actual transition of the divorce and then
Right.
beyond.
Without having to go to court, because if they had,
Exactly.
instead of going to you, if they had gone to Joe Schmo litigation attorney, that attorney would have been like, we're going to go to court and we're going to get this done, and kind of force a solution on the
Well, and
parents.
not necessarily a solution that was workable, because their
Right.
kids' ADHD, if it wasn't
Yeah.
addressed, it wouldn't have gone away. And so it really misses it's sort of like it just absolutely misses the mark.
Yeah.
And that's the risk to being adversaries, rather than finding the level of alignment
Mhm.
you can create, so that when you hit a speed bump, you can make corrections and keep moving forward.
I love that.
Right? That's what really works for families. Constantly fighting and shaming and blaming, it just really is not useful for them. And particularly given all the research that we know exists, and AFCC's done a ton of it. We know that it, as long as parents can get food on the table, get the kids to bed, get them to school, they're fine. What really is damaging to kids is the conflict.
The conflict, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard for parents to kind of take that step back and
That's
see it.
right.
How do you incorporate that when you're working with families, to kind of take that step back and take a look at that contact, how what that conflict is creating the harm or damage to their child?
Well, so I love being able to create in mediation with
Okay.
couples. I work with a lot of couples to create their parenting plans, right? And so I really like to step back and look at that parenting plan, walk through it with parents, because our parenting plans they're more than just how are we going to share parenting time. We
Right.
have provisions for dispute resolution, for decision making,
Okay.
for creating other provisions in the parenting plan that help the parties live under the terms of that plan, which is technically a court order, right?
Right.
But what I find really sort of frustrating is that, and the difference between creating a parenting plan and mediation versus a more adversarial process, is that that in our parenting plans we have the infamous paragraph 14 other provisions.
The other provisions, which
The other
are supposed to
provisions.
be guidelines and not necessarily court enforceable.
Well, here's the thing: is that many of those provisions
Okay.
are enforceable because they come from a crime and punishment kind of point of view, right? But that
Right.
doesn't help parents be better co-parents, right? It just
Right.
kind of sets these weird boundaries that they then have to figure out, okay, how are we going to choreograph around these boundaries that are set in place, instead of saying, and so what that creates is a whole notion of reactive co-parenting. Right. So they're always in reaction to, you're following the plan, you're not following the plan.
Right.
Here's what the plan says. You didn't do it. You're a bad parent.
That's
right?
it in a nutshell.
Pretty much.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Pretty much. And so if you want to help parents really co-parent post decree, then what is good to do is to help them shift from that sort of adversarial perspective and help them proactively co-parent. And how do they do that? Well, let's see. We put in another provision that says, few times a year, 3 times a year, you're just going to kind of sit down and figure out what's on the horizon that we need to just make sure is confirmed. Have we got sports lined up for the fall? Have we got summer vacations lined up? Have we got the holidays confirmed? Let's take a look at who's got Christmas this year, who has Thanksgiving. so that you're kind of paying attention to how, because really, when you look at the parenting plan as it's written, the two big chunks of it have to do with the school schedule for most families and the summer schedule. Well, that's like pretty much the whole year with some blips of school breaks, right?
And holidays.
And holidays, exactly.
Yeah.
Those are the exceptions to that plan, right? And so it's really helpful for parents to be thinking about stepping back and planning ahead so that there's not this, December 23rd, you're having a big fight about what's going to happen for the Christmas holidays. So it's finding things and also having communication protocols, right? How many, you're going to do a transition email, for example. If a child's been in a parent's care for 3 days or more, send a little transition email.
Yeah.
And those go back and forth so that parents kind of know what's happening with their kid. And that helps the child to a softer landing in the receiving parent's home.
Can you give us an example of a transition email?
Well, there's actually, when I work with parents, whether I'm mediating with them, whether I'm coaching them, or whether I'm serving as a PC, I really request that they get the co-parenting handbook. And that's by by Kristen Little and Karen Bunnell. It's a really super resource for parents because chapter 5 is all about communication, and they've got literally a template for that transition email. Talks about academics, health, physical, whatever kind of, there's some various categories for what's going to be going on in your kid's life, and all it takes is a couple of words, a couple of sentences in any of them, send it off. And so that way, when child comes to the receiving parent, they can actually ask if there was something that happened that's going to carry over, or something positive that happened. Hey, I hear you had blah blah blah, you had a great party, or you had this, you had that. It's a way to create, to sort of maintain connection,
right?
And that's for the child's sake, because for the child, every time that child transitions, that child has to say goodbye to a parent they love and say hello to a parent they love. And then they have to flip it around again the next time. Yeah. And it's very interesting. A number of years ago, there was a book written, a book called Low Boy, about a kid who wound up with a serious drug addiction.
Oh, wow.
And this is a kid who lived under a long distance parenting plan. And, was with dad sometimes, then with mom, and it was going back and forth between households.
Let me define really quickly. Long distance parenting plan is when the two parents oftentimes do not reside in the same state, or significantly far apart where they're not even in the same county.
But I remember, for whatever reason, I was interested in the book, and when I read it, and I found this statement that he made about, I love both of my families, but it was so hard to do exactly that, to say goodbye and go to the other family, right? Even when parents get along, it's hard for kids to do that. And parents, I think, are really oftentimes not very mindful of the child's perspective, which is what I always really try to help bring to the foreground. And really, it's when you bring the child's perspective to the foreground, that's the best way to start diffusing the conflict between the parents.
I love that. When you bring forth the child's perspective, it's a good way to diffuse the conflict between the parents. And again, the book you're talking about was the Co-Parenting Handbook by Karen Bunnell and Kristen Little.
It's fabulous for that.
Yeah, it is.
And and the other, I just kind of constantly, my mantra is, okay, be sure you read chapter 2 at least twice. Be sure you read chapter 5. Chapter 2 is about how do you actually create a co-parenting relationship as co-parents, not as former spouses, right? So that's shifting from parent mind, shifting to parent mind from spouse mind. And what that means is that you don't want to have, there's a certain shorthand that exists between spouses, right?
Okay.
Once you're no longer spouses, that shorthand is off the table.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
I had a client just recently say, well, we're both adults. We should be able to do that. And I said, well, how's that been working out for you? because,
What did they say?
you're calling me for dispute resolution.
Ah,
You could, how do you, you don't, that's the shorthand, right?
yeah.
I mean, and what I tell clients is, look, I can pretty much guarantee you conflict will live where there are unmet, unexpressed expectations.
So
So,
true.
let's
Yeah.
talk about how do we manage expectations,
Yeah.
right? When we're going to show up at a baseball game, and the kids are going to be, trying to go to one parent or the other, and you have a parenting plan that says specifically what they're supposed to do. Little check-in before we go about exactly how are we going to choreograph this when we're there, rather than, oh,
Uh-huh.
we can just be adults and figure it out when we get there. It's a very different approach. And that's that proactive versus reactive parenting that I try to encourage my clients to shoot for. Because it really is
Yeah.
about how skillfully, everybody who has kids in common they're all co-parents in some fashion. The question is, how skillful or not are you in that life, right? And so
Yeah.
the goal is, for me working with clients, is to help them find ways to just really continue to improve their skills, because they really can learn them if they have a context for defining the skill that's needed.
And I would say most of us do not have that skill because they don't, they don't teach us how to be parents.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's what I tell my clients about the handbook, right? That our
Yeah.
kids didn't come with any instruction manual, but if you're going to have to be co-parents, bingo, there's your instruction
Yeah,
manual.
the co-parenting handbook by
Yeah.
Karen Bunnell and Kristen Little. Karen Bunnell was
Yep.
actually on the podcast to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
She's great. So
Right.
when are you do you recommend the co-parenting handbook when as a co-parenting coach, a parenting coordinator, PC for short, and as a mediator?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And it really just depend, so for my mediation clients,
Yeah.
they always are very eager to, they're eager to, people who self-select for mediation to start a divorce process are really eager for what, for what do we do next?
Yeah.
Right? How do we map this? How do we create this? And so that's a really fun process to engage in with families, because the parents, they've self-selected for it, they come to it in good faith. And it really is a matter of helping them get to the resources they need. When you're looking at coaching, with coaching, oftentimes folks have been somewhat damaged by being adversaries. So it's a matter of figuring out, how kind of doing a damage assessment and figuring out, okay, how can we help start shifting away from, I know this adversary process is really difficult, so let's do something different. And that's very much the work that a parenting coordinator does as well. But oftentimes there will be a little bit more damage that's been inflicted by the adversary system. So the PC actually will have, as a PC, I typically will have authority to just simply be the dispute resolution provider. And so that's kind of on this, on that spectrum of, I'm going to step in and see if I can kind of mediate this. If I can't mediate it, I have the authority to make binding recommendations. And if it's something where they just are in a dispute and there needs to be a decision, I have the authority to make a decision for them. So it's, so it's really a matter of kind of, where's anybody on that spectrum? I used to joke about that, everybody's on the spectrum of dysfunction, right? It's just sort of where do you fit on that, right?
How
And
dysfunctional are you?
well, yeah, I mean, there's like pretty normal and pretty
Medium
dysfunctional,
and
yeah,
highly dysfunctional, where
exactly,
it's
and so we can all kind of figure out where do we fit on that, and then say, okay, so how do we make corrections so that life is more peaceful, things move more smoothly, and stress is reduced.
Yeah. What going hand in hand with that, is there other books or resources you recommend to your client besides the co-parenting handbook?
That's really the primary, because
Okay.
and I kind of almost use it like a textbook.
Yeah.
I mean, I really do. And what I love about that resource is that it's one thing to read it through. That's more like checking the boxes. It's important to read it through, but then go back, because it really does give you the information that you need to develop skills, and that in conjunction with
Mm,
somebody who's helping you kind of tie that to specific behaviors that are either described or observed, right, in that coaching or PC setting, right? That's what helps kind of bring this, bring to life the circumstances in which a particular skill's missing,
yeah. And have
right?
you, in your experience, have you found it, even if both parents don't read it, but one parent does, that the one parent who reads it is able to deal with the reactive parent a little bit better, maybe manage a little bit better?
I think that may be, I don't have any direct evidence of
Okay.
that, but I think that a parent who's going to be willing to do that will be taking the coaching as well,
Yeah.
right?
Doing the
Often,
co-parenting coaching with you. Yeah.
exactly. No, that's exactly right. Or taking the coaching, that's a very big part. The psychoeducation coaching piece of working as a PC is a really important piece of that.
And, in terms of the mediation that you're doing, is it just divorce? Do you do divorce and parenting plan mediation, or is it just
Mhm.
one? Okay, you do
Well,
both.
no, I do. Yeah, I do both of those. I
Okay.
mean, it's all family law, right? I mean,
Yes.
and actually, I think that one of the things that we're seeing is, for teens, I've always believed that teenagers are every bit have every are every much as at risk as 2-year-olds. They're
Yeah.
just in really different developmental places and bodies, but they really are. They really struggle, and so that's an area where I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen about what teens are about. So Children's
Yeah.
Hospital, I think, sponsors some really great programmings. They offer some really good programs in that regard, and those are the kinds of things I refer my clients to, are those online parenting programs. Like there's I think it's Children's, and they have how to parent your, for moms, how to parent your teenage son, and for dads, how to parent your teenage daughter. There
Yeah.
are a number of those kind of resources that are really helpful. There's also a great book. There are two versions of it now. The first one was Get Out of My Life, but first can you drive me and Cheryl to the mall? Right.
Heard
And
about
then
that.
there's
Yeah.
the second kind of edition of that, which is Get Out of My Life, but first can you drive me and Alex into town? And one is by they both are co-authored by one of the same authors. His name is his name is escaping me now, but and then the second one about driving Alex and me to town was by a British psychologist and this same author who wrote the
Oh,
original, Get Out of My Life. But they're really good because they talk about teen development. But what we're seeing is that related to teen development is we're seeing a lot of resist refuse dynamic cases, and particularly cases with teenagers where parents have been very high conflict and the kids just kind of say, you know what, I'm over
yeah.
this. And they vote with their feet, right? And at some level you have to ask yourself, why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Right?
Resist and refuse. And the refuse dynamic that Kathleen is talking about is when the teenage child refuses to go to the other parent's home because the conflict with the parent is so intense that it's as if, well, it basically the teen who, God, what's the word, the teen allies with the parent
Mm-hmm.
in that conflict, and then refuses to go to the other parent's home.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because there's the whole so there's a whole range of, I mean, that's, and it's not one size fits all for those kind
Yeah.
of cases, but we're seeing more of them. And there can be, I think the hard cases are the cases that are this kind of combined estrangement,
Right.
like real estrangement from a parent who may have a mental health problem or have a substance abuse
Yeah.
problem,
Yeah.
and so versus a parent who's just really decided they're going to poison the well,
Oh,
and really just make the kid align in that regard. But it really is important, I think, to be looking at those kinds of, really paying attention to teens and what do they need, you know because what they really do have to do is individuate from those parents.
Yeah.
And they need to do that in a healthy way to the best of their ability, right?
And how do they do that?
Well, I think I mean, you know, I mean, honestly,
It's a tough question.
quite honestly, I don't know how they do it sometimes with some of the parents. I think for men, it really depends on the kid. And, what that kind of speaks to is, kids kind of by their nature are pretty resilient, but they also can't have that well depleted. Right. So that's one of the things that I really like to talk to parents about is how do we work in a way, how do you co-parent in a way that you actually help your child regenerate that resilience? Right. So, and then that part is in how you do those exchanges, those transitions between households, for example. I mean, it's really a huge thing for a kid. I mean, it's really important for a kid, particularly like a younger child, for example, for them to actually have the ability to move freely between both parents' households and to love both parents in that process. So it should be okay for a kid to have a picture of the other parent, have pictures of both parents in both households, right?
And what you're talking about is that, and this is when it gets tough, when sometimes like we're talking about codependency, where one parent is codependent on their child.
Yeah.
And so then the poor child can individuate themselves because one parent is enmeshed. And it really has to, that parent has to let that child go and say, have a good time at your dad's, instead of, oh, I'm going to miss you so much when you're going to be gone.
That's horrible for kids.
Yeah.
That's just horrible for kids. I mean, talk about a loyalty bind, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the kind of stuff that when you're working with families to try to get a notion of, is that happening? And then how do you look at having a conversation to even broach the subject at all? And to the extent that you can broach the subject, then how do you start identifying ways to disrupt that dynamic? Right.
Between the enmeshed parent and the child.
Absolutely. I mean, if it's really severe, that requires a mental health professional. That requires an intervention. And, speaking of that, I mean, that's often the kind of case where a PC is involved.
The parenting coordinator, right?
The parenting coordinator.
And then we have the next parent who is angry, let's say when spouse cheated. So then you have that parent telling the child, well, if your father hadn't cheated, we'd still be together. Oh yeah. Or you're going to visit your father and her this weekend. So we have to be careful of that too, because that's not healthy for the poor child.
Well, again, but that's just a dynamic that needs to get disrupted. And to the extent that the parent won't support that process, then I think it's really critical to have the child in a therapeutic, have the child be able to essentially kind of hold their own boundary around that parent that just won't let it be. Right. I mean, that's kind of how that's a pretty significant problem, because for the child, right? That's what's putting pressure on the child to not meet his or her own developmental benchmarks, right? Certainly social, kind of social emotionally.
So let's say you're in mediation or even you. Okay, let me think about it. Okay, so let's say you're in mediation and then this comes up and you're experiencing this refuse and resist dynamic based on a scenario of either one parent is upset at the other parent for an affair, or you've got the codependency. How do you handle that in mediation?
That's not the typical client that comes to me for mediation.
Okay.
That's going to be more in those are going to be the higher conflict litigated cases, so more likely than not. And so that's going to be a case where they will have done all that damage with their parenting evaluation and all their fighting and all of that kind of stuff. And then they'll appoint the parenting coordinator to
yourself. That's where Kathleen comes in.
They'll appoint the parenting coordinator to come in and say, number one, it's going to be oftentimes monitoring services to make sure that folks are actually engaging in services. And
Ah,
then,
yeah.
working with the parents on, implementing their parenting plan and kind of working with, monitoring their emails. How do they communicate with one another? Because, that's really, I think I talked earlier about how important it is to have communication protocols and how conflict lives where
Okay.
there are unexpressed or unexpressed and unmet expectations, right?
Yes.
And I think so much of family law, if you just take it from a managing expectations point of view, if
Mm,
you just thought, I'm just going to look at what's the landscape of potential expectations here, right? And
okay.
how am I going to just like step back, look at what do people expect to be happening here, and how are they playing that out? And oh, by the way, how are they communicating about how that's playing out?
I
Right?
see. Yeah.
That's where that's where you can kind of say, oh yeah, I see what the problem is. So a really typical one is, for example, when you have a communication protocol in which the parents are going to be communicating by email, but
Communicating
then
by email.
communicating by email,
Okay.
right?
Okay, let me
But
ask you this. Are we talking about something like a co-parenting app like Our Family Wizard or just straight email?
they can,
Okay.
that has its pluses and minuses, but they do have some kind of communication protocol
Okay.
in place. And they text when there's an emergency, but
Yeah.
then they kind of it's almost like, it's like they fall off the wagon with it,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And then they start texting. There'll be some reason that they start texting, and then they start doing
True.
that more than
Yeah.
they're actually communicating by email. So here's
Okay.
where they are in a flood of, texts, which are incomplete communications in the first place. I mean, just look at,
True.
where are you, which is, I mean, just don't even get me started on text language, right? Because
Okay.
it's not real English, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you start from there,
Mhm.
and then you think, and then you figure out, and then they're texting one another back and forth, they their communications are reactive to the situation. They're sort of a self-created emergency, and rather than it being, and that's how they fall into that reactive parenting place. If
Okay.
they step back and stop shooting the text back and forth, because it's only a matter of time once they stop really consciously communicating and sitting down and writing an email.
Which takes
um,
time.
it does, and it takes thought,
Yeah.
presumably. When they're popping off texts, right,
Yeah.
then it's that much harder to go back and look at what did you say. So then you think you saw what you are, you think you know what they said, and you maybe know 75% of it, but it's that 25% you missed it's really critical to making a decision, right, or to
Oh, okay.
accomplishing something or whatever that might be. But that's where or they start verbally communicating about things at exchanges. Then they leave the exchange and forget, and they think they know what they remembered, but it was something different, right? So one of my favorite
Yeah.
things I tell clients is, look, the faintest of ink is always more powerful than the most vivid memory.
The faintest of ink?
Is
Oh, is
more
always most
powerful
or
than the most vivid memory.
ah.
Yeah, see, that's what they
Very
do.
good. Yeah.
That's what they do, right? And so it's really
Wow.
what's that consciousness you're going to bring to actively functioning in life, and not just continuing to react to what's happening around you. That's what the adversary process drives for families, and that's the habit that they
Yeah.
have to break, right? Because
Wow.
it's an adrenaline driven
It is.
it's adrenaline driven, and that's really unhealthy,
So true. Even
right?
for us as
So
lawyers, yeah.
exactly. I always lost weight if I went to trial,
Oh, goodness. Well,
right?
that and losing sleep.
Well, there you
Yeah.
go, right?
Yeah.
The cortisol from that doesn't really counteract that, your stomach's too upset to eat, right? But
Right.
those were the past days. Um,
And now you're focusing on helping parents build their toolbox aside from just having the hammer and the nail.
Well, that's right. I mean, and it makes such a huge difference for their families,
Yeah.
right? Because they both want to have functioning households. And it really is a matter of how do you help them identify the skill, how can we just add a little skill here, right?
Right.
And that's where when you're doing that work either as a coach or as a PC, and you're really kind of watching what's, how are they moving, how are they communicating, that's where you can step in and say, well, here's where I see you guys kind of went off a cliff, right? And
Okay.
so let's talk about how are you going to avoid going off the cliff again.
So let's we talked about your work as a parenting coordinator, PC. Let's talk about your work as a co-parenting coach.
It's
What?
basically the same. It's just I'm not a decision maker. Right. And
So
I don't make binding recommendations. I mean, that's really the biggest difference. It really is the level of, it really has to do with how do you match the skill level of the parents to come to resolution without having to have somebody draw the line in the sand. Right. So if you have parents who
okay.
are really pretty high functioning,
Yeah.
but they fall off the cliff, right? They
Yeah.
start, they start communicating by text, and then boom,
Yeah.
that's just, we've got a big problem, right? You say, well, okay, so let's stop texting. That's the first thing. No more texting. No more talking about this stuff at exchanges that goes either in the transition email or in a specific email that's
Okay.
consistent with your communication provision, right? That says, when you have an issue, it's in the subject line. Is it, does it have a shelf life? Does it have to be, is it a quick turnaround time? You have to like kind of give notice. I need a response, right? Typically, you're going to have a communication protocol that requires a response within a certain period of time, or that parent will just simply make whatever little decision, or do whatever thing needs to be done, right?
Yeah.
But again, that's how you look at using those other provisions in that, again, that infamous paragraph 14 of the parenting plan, that you really utilize that. When I mediate with clients, I really try to help them utilize that by adding provisions that support them as co-parents, and help them kind of self-select those things. And I identify, here's what I think are the pieces that really help you as co-parents. And that's looking at just kind of communicating several times a year to make sure you're on the same page for how this parenting plan is going to flow through the year. Right.
Right.
And then the kind of taking that down the next, that's the 30,000 foot level, right? Then taking that to week, what are you going to do to communicate to continue that flow? And that's going to be those transition emails. That's going to be, we need to discuss a certain thing. Here's the information I have. What do you think about it? What are we going to do? Right?
Yeah.
It's those kind of things.
In terms of you're talking about one thing that parents can do to avoid being reactive in terms of the trial schedules, having, a meeting, right? Having a meeting, say in February, about what's up ahead, what sports are we looking at?
Actually January.
Oh, January.
Depending,
okay.
yeah, because January, February, you can be looking at what are going to be the spring activities, what are going to be the summer camps. How are you going to do that?
Yeah.
Right.
Do you get involved in that as a co-parenting coach? Sometimes?
Oh yeah, sometimes, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's really just kind of helping people, because again, it really, from my perspective, it doesn't come from a place of, somebody's a bad actor or any of that kind of thing. It's like, okay, how are you guys just going to manage this? Right. Again, it's that expectation management perspective.
Okay.
Right. That if, and those are just simply using some skills. They're just management skills, right? I mean, I tell my clients that, if you think about, and this is what the co-parenting handbook talks about, is that you want to have a business relationship, you want to have a professional relationship with your co-parent, right? And so if you think about it as essentially like your coworkers or co-managers, and the product that you're producing are great kids, right?
Right.
And you may not like your coworker,
Yeah.
but you get that if you're going to produce this product, you have to be on the same page as managers, right? And
Right.
make all the gears work so that at the end of the day, you spit out that great kid, right? And
Yeah.
and I remember I actually said that. I said, you don't have to love your coworkers, but you do
Yeah.
have to find a way to navigate communications with them and navigate how you accomplish things, how you plan, so that you really are aligned on the end result.
Yeah, so true. And I like to also kind of think in the fact of the transition email, just in terms of communicating with a coworker. Let's
Mhm.
think if you were the transition email is almost like you're informing your coworker where to take off next on the on the project,
Absolutely.
what you
Absolutely.
did, what needs to be done. Think of
Mhm.
it that way.
Yep, absolutely. That's great. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that because if dealing with coworkers is relatable for most parents,
Right.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, it really is. And so, if you have a coworker that you can't fire, there you are, right?
How do you
You know,
communicate with them? Because you can't fire
right,
them.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. And you don't want to quit your job, you know.
Which is
You
raising this great kid.
There you
Yeah.
go. There you
Yeah.
go. So, it's that it's that's what gets missed when parents are pushed into a system where there's this sort of propensity to think in terms of right and wrong, you know, win or loser, good and bad.
Yeah. Right.
That just is that is just so much trying to fit a square peg into a round hole for families.
Right.
Right. In fact, very, very early in my practice, when I was working with clients in family law, you have the client that walks in and is like, I want to win and blah, 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 blah.
Oh, yeah.
And, and I would listen politely. And then I would say, look, what you need to understand about family law is that it really isn't about winning or losing. It's more
So true.
often about losing or losing worse.
Oh my gosh.
And
Wow.
And then I would just say, and I've never felt that was a good option for my
That's
client.
that sums it up so perfectly. It's about losing or losing worse because yeah, that's so great. It's not win or lose, losing or losing worse.
Well, and when because that's what, because as I said, I really think that families need to be able to solve, when families split up,
Yeah.
they've got a problem.
Right.
Now, I have never been able to solve a problem by shaming or blaming someone.
Very true.
Right.
Very true.
It's just, it's sort of like, I could not have money to pay my rent, and shaming somebody who didn't pay me or blaming somebody who didn't pay me still isn't going to pay my rent. Right.
Right. Right.
I mean, you really have to figure out, okay, where's the money that anybody can draw from? Where's the money?
Yeah.
What am I going to do here? Right. And that really is about that, and I haven't really thought about it, but it is that kind of personal accountability that when we have kids in common, when we have property in common, those kinds of things that you're looking at sort of dividing up in a
Right.
divorce, it really is helping define what's the new personal accountability you have. Right.
So true.
And then really finding a path in which you balance the personal accountability as best you can.
And then you learn that from reading the co-parenting handbook.
Well, you learn you learn some different skills about that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't frame it in that way, but I think you learn skills that support
Right.
taking that personal account responsibility.
Do you in your buckets that you're doing co-parenting coaching, parenting coordinator, and family law mediator, do you do one more than the other? Or do you think they're all equal?
In terms of the balance of folks that I work with,
Yeah.
I'd say they're pretty balanced,
Okay.
actually. Maybe I do more PC and mediation than specific co-parent coaching, but it's all sort of, I mean, I just see it all as part of working with families to help them move forward. Right. So
Okay.
however I take on that, so I just take on that task as it comes, those tasks as they,
Yeah.
those cases as they come to me.
Working with families to help them move forward in a non-adversarial, non-reactive way.
Well, I mean, it's just really a matter of, if you, I mean, I think what people get really frustrated about in the adversary system is that whether they feel like they're prevailing or not,
Okay.
they still feel unproductive.
Oh, so true. Yeah.
Even if they win. That was why I just was like, this isn't winning. This is just a mess. Right. you know I mean, it's just like, yeah, I'm not seeing this as being very useful. And that's the thing, is that people, call me hopelessly optimistic, but I really believe that people want to be productive in their lives. They want to have open hearts. They want to just live their lives in a way that that they get their needs met, that that they can care for their kids. And so it's
Right.
really um you know, anything that kind of takes them off that path just doesn't seem fair to me. It's just kind of like, really, it isn't going to be helpful. And, and they kind of tell you, look, I'm really frustrated in this process. What else can I do? And it's not file another motion usually.
That is so true.
Right. you know, it's
No,
just
filing another motion, no, it does not help at all.
not
Yeah.
usually.
No.
I mean, unless you have something, unless it's just a situation where nobody's going to change. But for the most part, I think when people realize that they're feeling defeated, they're not feeling empowered. And so finding a way in which you can help them disrupt that feeling and put them on a path where they actually feel
Right.
not powerful, meaning that they're dominating, but that they can feel empowered to take control of their own situation. Again, it's that personal responsibility and accountability, that they can take that and then, just take charge of it for themselves. That's what really tends to serve families.
So true. And is that coming? And it seems like though for people to get empowered again, they need that either a really emotionally intelligent family law attorney such as yourself, or get that co-parenting coaching.
Correct. That's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah, that's correct. And that's where good mental health providers, can be supportive of that. I mean, for some people, they really do need a therapeutic intervention, but for many people, they really just need somebody to kind of help them step back from what they're doing and assess
Right.
what's going on, and then help them figure out what's missing and how can you fill it in.
Yeah. And again, it just goes, I mean, such a great visual you gave there about having tools in your family law toolkit
Mhm.
aside from the nail and hammer. And I think that's why it's so co-parenting coaching is so important to work
Well,
with.
any, parents, families being in families in conflict, being in any kind of dispute resolution process that is not adversarial, is pretty much more likely to serve them than not.
Not only that too, it's a solution that they come up with themselves as well.
Exactly.
Right. And I think that's
That's
what you're
exactly
talking
right.
about, that personal accountability, because they created it themselves.
Well, yeah, they have ownership in it,
Yeah.
right? It's relevant to them. And they don't have anybody else to blame but themselves, right? So there's that.
Well,
But the thing is, but it takes them away from that sense about that there needs to be somebody to blame, right? That's the difference between feeling empowered and feeling victimized.
so true. That is very insightful.
Well, I'm glad I could help you out with that
That's
today.
that's why you have all of those hats. Oh gosh. Well, thank you. We're here at the end of our time. Thank you so
Oh,
much,
okay.
Kathleen,
Boy,
for I know it just flew by.
I know it was very fun. It's such a pleasure to spend time with you.
Well, I mean, just thank you so much for coming on and just sharing your insight about all that you do with co-parenting coaching and your work as a parenting coordinator and helping families as a mediator to create a durable parenting plan that they can
It's
be
critical.
happy with. And
It's critical.
how do people get a hold of you to use your services?
I'm very easy to find on the internet because I have the domain Divorce Mediation Seattle. So
Oh,
you can
okay.
just, it's very easy to find me if you just look for, literally, if you Google Divorce Mediation Seattle, you can actually give it a try right there and see what happens. But
I'm typing in right now, Divorce
okay,
Mediation Seattle.
yeah.
Okay, there we go.
How am I looking?
Divorce Mediation Seattle. I'm not seeing you.
What?
Oh, it's coming on. You're coming. Yeah. You're
Should be
coming on.
Northwest Family Mediation,
Yeah,
right?
there you go. Well, I had all the paid ads first, but
Oh, there you go.
you there? Okay. So to work with Kathleen as a parenting coach, to work with her as your family law mediator to help you create a parenting plan. If you're looking for a parenting coordinator to help you because you just need that person to come in and make decisions because it's so much conflict and because the court said you need a parenting coordinator, then you can contact Kathleen Royer at Seattle Divorce Mediation.
Oh, actually, I'm Northwest Family Mediation.
Oh, Northwest Family Mediation.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're going to contact Kathleen at Northwest Family Mediation. And Kathleen, just last final question for you.
Oh.
What is the last book that you read, or what is something that people wouldn't know about you just from looking at you?
So probably what most people would not know about me looking at me is that I'm a 7-time Seattle to Portland bike ride participant.
Oh my gosh,
Most
7 times?
Yeah, 7 times, most recently in 2022. So
oh
it was
my gosh.
actually 2022 is the 30th anniversary of the first time I rode the Seattle to Portland bike ride. So I'm very proud of that.
Wow.
Made it all the way.
Oh my gosh, congratulations. That's crazy.
It was
7
crazy.
times.
It was a lot of fun.
And if for those of you who are on the podcast and can't see Kathleen, she's very petite. I'm like 5'6", and I saw Kathleen. What are you, 5'2"?
No, not even.
My gosh. She's like, are you 4'11"?
No, I'm 5 feet.
Okay,
yeah.
she's a very tiny, very petite woman, and you wouldn't think of her being like this ultra athlete. But
well,
I wondered.
I don't know that I'd say ultra, but yeah, I'm committed. So there's that.
Well, are you going to do 8 times in 2024?
Well, I'm waiting to. I'm going to see about that.
Okay.
So that's I'm not going to do it this year, but I'm considering 2024. I'm threatening that I'm going to try to do it in one day again, but watch this space.
Oh wow!
I don't think I think my one-day rides are over. But
oh my gosh,
you never know.
Yeah.
You never know.
Well, good luck to you in 2024 then. And
we'll see what we get.
And thank you all for joining us again on another episode of the Akiona Law Podcast, where we talk about anything that intersects with the areas of family law and divorce. And thank you again to my special guest, Kathleen Royer.
Thank you so much.
Until next time, stay safe and stay healthy out there. The information in this podcast is general advice only and should not in any respect be relied on as specific legal advice.